On November 4th, 1998, inside the Zenith Electronics factory on Dickens Avenue, Chicago, the machines are still running. 17 assembly lines, hundreds of hands in motion. The floor hums the way it has hummed every single day for the last 4 decades. Steel on steel, the low throb of conveyor belts, the sharp smell of solder heating metal. Arden Calloway is at his station. He has been at the station in one form or another since 1959. His hands move without instruction. They do not need his eyes. They have done this so many times that the motion has become something deeper than habit. It has become identity. He does not know that 3 floors above him, in a room with no windows, a group of men in suits are looking at a number. One number. A loss figure so large it sits on the page like a verdict. And it is. In every practical sense, exactly that. Chapter 1, Inside Zenith Factory, a quiet decision seals fate. The decision being made in that room will not be announced today. No alarm will sound on the factory floor. No manager will walk the line and pull workers aside. Arden Calloway will drive home tonight in his '94 Buick, eat dinner, watch the news, possibly on a Zenith television, and go to sleep without knowing that the ground beneath everything he has built his life on has already cracked. This is not a story about a company that collapsed overnight. Overnight collapses are rare. They make better headlines, but they are almost never what actually happened. What actually happened to Zenith Electronics, the company that once put a television set in 1 out of every 4 American homes, is slower, more painful, and far more instructive than a single catastrophic moment. Hi viewers, before we go any further, I want to ask you something personal. Is there a company, a job, or a place from your city that was once great and is now completely gone? Drop the name in the comments. Let's talk about it. And if you want to know how Zenith Electronics fell apart piece by piece, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell, because this story is only getting started. The building on Dickens Avenue is still standing today. You can drive past it. The brick is the same dark red it has always been, the kind of industrial brick that was built to last 100 years and has. The steel frame windows are still there, their large panes catching the gray Chicago light the same way they caught it in 1960, in 1975, in 1991. The name of the company has been removed from above the entrance, but look closely at the brick where the letters once were. The ghost of the word is still there, the shape of Zenith pressed into the wall by decades of weathering around letters that no longer exist. That building is not just a building, it is a question. How does a company that helped invent the American television set, that built the remote control, that pioneered cable-ready tuners, that employed 22,000 people in a single city, end up as a hollowed-out shell in the middle of a neighborhood that used to organize its entire economic life around it? The answer does not begin in 1998. It does not begin with the loss figure on that page. It begins with 2 men in a Chicago garage in 1918, chasing something invisible and believing, with a certainty that would shape everything that followed, that they could control it. But here is the thing about men who believe they can control everything. That belief is exactly what builds empires, and it is exactly what makes those empires impossible to save when the world changes its rules. What kind of company was Zenith before that room full of suits made their decision? And what did it cost to build something that extraordinary, only to watch the system consume it from the inside? Chapter 2. 2 hobbyists build radio empire through obsession trust. In the winter of 1918, 2 men are huddled inside a garage on the north side of Chicago arguing about frequency, not money, not market share. Frequency, the precision of a radio signal. The difference between a transmission that crackles and cuts out and one that arrives clean, steady, and true. R.H.G. Matthews and Carl Hassel are amateur radio operators, hobbyists by any reasonable definition. And they are obsessed in the particular way that only obsessives can be, completely, humorlessly, and without apology. They are building radio equipment, not to sell it, not yet. They are building it because they can't stand the idea that something they know should work perfectly, a clean signal crossing open air from one point to another, is being done poorly. Everywhere they look, the standard is mediocre. And mediocre to men like Matthews and Hassel is a kind of insult. Their call sign is 9ZN. That will become the name of their company. What changes everything is the arrival of Eugene F. McDonald Jr. McDonald is not an engineer, he is something more dangerous, a visionary with the personality of a salesman and the conviction of a preacher. McDonald walks into that garage and sees something Matthews and Hassel have not fully articulated yet. He sees a business. Not a radio business, a trust business. McDonald understands, in the early 1920s, what most of corporate America will not understand for another 30 years. The family living room is the most valuable real estate in America. Not because of its square footage, because of what happens inside it. Families gather there. They relax there. They believe what they hear and see there. Whoever puts a device in that room and makes it work reliably, makes it something a family can count on the way they count on their doctor or their priest, owns something money cannot easily displace. McDonald renames the company Zenith, the highest point, the apex, the moment the sun stands directly overhead and casts no shadow. This is not accidental branding, it is a declaration of intent. The three men build Zenith Radio Corporation into one of the most respected electronics manufacturers in the United States before World War II has even begun. They do it not through aggressive pricing or clever advertising, though McDonald can sell anything to anyone, but through an almost militant commitment to product quality. Every radio that leaves a Zenith facility works. It works the first time. It works the 50th time. It works 5 years later when the family's youngest child accidentally knocks it off a shelf. The market notices, retailers notice, American families notice. And McDonald makes a decision in the early years that will define Zenith's character for the next 8 decades. The company will never chase low end of the market. It will not compete on price. It will compete on trust. On quality so consistent and so documented that the Zenith name becomes a shorthand for reliability, the same way certain other names become shorthand for disappointment. This philosophy is not just a business strategy, it becomes the company's skeleton, the structure everything else is built around, which means that when the world eventually demands something different from that skeleton, Zenith will not be able to bend. Eugene McDonald does not live to see what his philosophy ultimately costs. He dies in 1958, 1 year before Arden Calloway takes his first shift on the factory floor. But his fingerprints are on every television Zenith will ever build, and they are on the coffin, too. What did it actually look like to build something with those fingerprints on it? Inside the factory that McDonald's philosophy created? And what was it about the way Zenith built things that made its products outlast almost everything the competition ever manufactured? Chapter 3. Zenith's relentless quality culture creates strength and vulnerability. Every television that leaves the Zenith factory on Dickens Avenue is tested before it goes anywhere. Not sampled, not spot-checked. Every single one. This is not standard industry practice in the 1960s. Most manufacturers test a percentage, pull 1 unit off the line per 100, run it through QA, sign off on the batch. It is efficient. It is cost-effective. It is the logical way to run a high-volume production operation when margin pressure is constant and your shareholders want to see the numbers move. Zenith does not do it that way. Never has. The engineers on the floor, men who have spent careers learning the specific failure points of cathode ray tubes, the tolerances of color convergent circuits, the precise conditions under which a picture tube degrades before its time. These men will not ship a television they have not personally confirmed works. This is not a policy written in a handbook. It is a culture, a shared conviction, passed from senior technicians to apprentices the way a trade is passed down in a family. You do not put your name on something you have not verified. The components are American, sourced domestically. Not because of a regulation or a political position, because Zenith's engineers insist on it. Foreign components, they argue, introduce variables they cannot account for, unknown tolerances. inconsistent quality control at the source. And if there is one thing the philosophy of Eugene MacDonald built into the bones of this company, it is that variables are the enemy of trust. The result is a television set that, in objective testing, outlasts virtually every competitor's product on the market. Consumer Reports, during this period, ranks Zenith at or near the top of reliability studies repeatedly. Repair technicians across the country develop a quiet professional respect for Zenith sets, not because they are simple to fix, but because they so rarely need fixing. Now pay attention to this detail. It seems minor right now. Because Zenith refuses to adopt the modular chassis design that is sweeping the industry, in the mid-1960s, its televisions are built differently from everything else on the market. Competitors move to modular because it is faster to assemble, cheaper to manufacture, and easier to repair in the field. The entire industry follows this logic with the efficiency of water finding its level. Zenith stays with its integrated design. The engineers prefer it. The testing protocols require it. The craftsmanship culture of the floor demands it. At the time, industry analysts write this off as premium market stubbornness, a niche position. Zenith is choosing to serve the customer who pays more and expects more, while the mass market moves toward affordable, modular, good enough. What no one in 1966 understands, not Zenith's executives, not its competitors, not the analysts writing the trade reports, is that this decision is accidentally preserving something the market will eventually want desperately and find almost impossible to source. The irony of that is going to take 30 years to arrive. In the meantime, the factory on Dickens Avenue runs at full capacity. The testing lines move. The American components come in through the loading dock. The finished televisions go out in Zenith-branded boxes to retailers in 48 states, and a man named Arden Calloway shows up to his first shift. He is 23 years old. He has no idea what he is walking into. None of the people who are about to become his colleagues do either. They do not know they are entering the best years of something that is already quietly and invisibly becoming fragile. What does it actually feel like to be inside that building during the years when everything is working? When the factory is not just a place of employment, but the center of gravity for an entire community? When 22,000 people build their lives around a single address on Dickens Avenue? Chapter 4. The factory becomes economic heart of entire community. Walk 6 blocks in any direction from the Zenith factory in 1965 and tell what you find. On Armitage Avenue, the grocery store owner knows his Monday rush comes from the overnight shift change. On Dickens itself, the diner opens at 5:45 a.m. because Zenith's first shift starts at 6, and the workers who live 2 blocks away want coffee and eggs before they punch in. The parish school on Cortlandt Street has enrollment numbers that track almost exactly with Zenith's payroll. More workers means more families means more children in those classrooms. The tavern on the corner of Lyndale has a wall of photographs behind the bar. Zenith Christmas parties, bowling league trophies, shift supervisors posing in front of completed production milestones. This is not a neighborhood that happens to have a factory in it. This is a neighborhood the factory built. 22,000 people. At peak production in the mid-1960s, the Zenith factory on Dickens Avenue employs 22,000 workers. Not across multiple facilities in multiple cities. In this building, in this neighborhood, in Chicago. To put that number in human terms, that is larger than many American small towns. That is an entire economy housed inside a single red brick structure and the streets that surround it. Arden Calloway is one of them. He starts on the line in 1959, placed in the component assembly section where the work is precise and demanding in the way that careful, repetitive things are demanding. Not physically brutal, but requiring a quality of attention that cannot be faked and cannot be rushed. His job is to place and solder components onto circuit boards that will eventually become the electronic brain of a Zenith television. Every connection must be clean. Every joint must hold. Because somewhere in Middle America, a family is going to plug in the set his hands helped build, and the first thing that happens when they turn it on will be, in some small but real way, a reflection of what he did at his station today. Arden Calloway never misses a shift. Not in 32 years. His hands carry the evidence. Small, pale scars from solder burns accumulated the way a woodworker accumulates calluses, not all at once, but one day at a time, each one the physical record of a specific moment of work. His colleagues on the floor know him the way colleagues know a person when they spend more waking hours together than they spend with their own families. His lunch order, his silence before a difficult run. The fact that he keeps a photograph of his 2 daughters taped inside his locker and has replaced it 3 times as they grew from children to teenagers to adults who have, by now, moved to other cities and built other lives. Ask Arden Calloway what it meant to work at Zenith, and he does not reach for sentiment. He reaches for precision. "You didn't work at Zenith," he says. "You belong to it." That is not nostalgia dressed in simple language. That is an organizational fact. Zenith offers its workers something that the post-war American labor market is learning to offer less and less: permanence. Not just a paycheck, an address, a position in a social order that feels, if not eternal, then at minimum generational. Arden's neighbor came here before him. His brother-in-law works 2 sections over. The man who trained him on his first week has a son who is now, 20 years later, a floor supervisor 3 buildings down. Meanwhile, in living rooms from Boston to Los Angeles, the television set in the corner of the room is Zenith. Families gather around it for Ed Sullivan on Sunday night. They watch Walter Cronkite announce the moon landing and grip each other's hands. They argue about what to watch on Saturday afternoon and settle it the way American families settle things. Someone is unhappy about it, but they all watch together anyway. The set runs for years without a service call. It is built to do exactly that. No one inside those walls in 1965 believes this will end. The men at the top of the company can see the industry changing. They can see the Japanese manufacturers moving. They can read the import numbers. But the floor does not see any of that. The floor sees full shifts and a full parking lot, and the diner on Armitage that is still packed at 6 a.m. The floor has no reason to look past the wall. Outside the wall, the world has already started changing in ways that will make everything inside it, every shift, every photograph, every carefully soldered connection, suddenly, shockingly, temporary. Chapter 5. Japanese competition slowly erodes Zenith leadership underestimates threat. The first Japanese television sets arrive in American discount stores in 1967, and they look, to the Zenith executive team, like background noise. That is the only accurate way to describe the initial response. Not alarm. Not denial, exactly. More like the organizational equivalent of hearing a car alarm go off 2 streets over, registering it, noting it, and returning to the conversation already in progress. The imports are cheaper, the brand names are unfamiliar, the sets are going into the kinds of retail spaces where Zenith does not compete and, in the minds of Zenith's leadership, does not need to compete. The consensus inside the executive offices on Dickens Avenue is calm and, at the time, defensible. Zenith competes on quality. Its customer is not the bargain aisle customer. These markets do not overlap in any meaningful way. The memos from this period still exist in archival records. They are careful documents, measured, written by intelligent men who are looking at real data and drawing conclusions that are, given the information available to them in 1967, rational. The Japanese imports are undercutting price at the low end. Zenith is not the low end. Therefore, the threat is manageable. What the memos do not account for, what they cannot account for, because the data does not exist yet, is what happens when the low end starts moving up. Because that is what happens. The Japanese manufacturers, Sony, Panasonic, Hitachi, are not standing still at the bargain tier. Every dollar they save in manufacturing cost is going back into engineering, into research, into the kind of scaled production that drives unit costs down year over year in ways that are not linear, they accelerate. By 1970, the quality gap between Japanese imports and American-made televisions has closed in ways that the 1967 memos did not predict. By 1973, it has closed further. The sets are not just cheaper, they are competitive. Zenith's market share begins to decline. Not collapse, decline. Slowly enough, in the early years that each quarterly report can be contextualized, can be given an explanation that sounds structural rather than existential. The oil crisis is affecting consumer spending. A model year transition is in progress. The premium segment is holding. The language of managed optimism runs through the executive communications of this period like a current beneath the surface of everything else being said. On the factory floor, Arden Calloway and the 22,000 people around him feel none of this. The line is still moving. The shifts are still full. The diner on Armitage is still packed at 6 a.m. and the bowling league is still meeting on Thursdays. And the photograph inside Calloway's locker has been replaced again. His daughters are in high school now, both of them, and one of them has told him she wants to study accounting at the University of Illinois. He is proud. He is steady. He has no reason to feel otherwise. But inside the executive offices, the conversations are changing. The word restructuring begins appearing, cautiously, hypothetically, as a concept being considered rather than a plan being executed. A joint venture is explored with a Japanese supplier. Component sourcing is quietly adjusted in 2 product lines. Small moves, careful moves. The kind of moves that feel like responses to a manageable problem rather than last-ditch efforts to outrun a wave that is already overhead. The workers are not told any of this. They are not told because, from the perspective of the men making these decisions, there is nothing yet to tell. The factory is running. Checks are clearing. The situation is being managed. This is the story management tells itself in the fall of 1974, and in the spring of 1975, and again through 1976, and it is true in a narrow and temporary sense. But there is a version of the truth that only becomes visible from a distance, the version where every small adjustment, every incremental response to an incremental threat, is also a small withdrawal, a small surrender of ground that, once given, is never recovered. Zenith sees the storm. Every senior person in that building sees it. The forecasts are in the files. The models have been run. They respond. They genuinely do. But response, it turns out, is not the same thing as movement. And movement, in a market shifting as fast as the television industry is shifting in the mid-1970s, is the only thing that survives. So here is the question that will define the next chapter of this story, the one that changes everything that comes after it. If Zenith's own engineers were quietly sitting on something that the entire global electronics market was about to start desperately searching for, something built into every single set that left Dickens Avenue, why was no one inside the company able to see it in time to use it? Chapter 6. Collector Market reveals Zenith's legendary durability. Too late in 1982, a Japanese electronics collector named Kenji Watanabe walks into a Chicago secondhand store and finds a Zenith television from 1961. He does not buy it because it is cheap. It is not cheap. He buys it because he plugs it in the back of the store. And the picture comes on clean and sharp and steady. 21 years after the set was built. In a used goods store on the north side of Chicago, with no maintenance record and no service history. The picture is as good as the day it left Dickens Avenue. Watanabe takes the set apart that same evening, back at his hotel. He photographs every component. He measures tolerances that should, by any reasonable standard of electronic aging, have drifted into failure years ago. They have not. The soldering joints are intact. The component placements are within spec. The integrated chassis design, the one Zenith refused to abandon when every other manufacturer in the world moved to modular, has held its alignment across 2 decades of use in a way that modular construction simply cannot replicate. He writes about it in Japanese electronics enthusiast publications first, then in translated excerpts that begin circulating in collector communities in the United States and Western Europe through the late 1970s and into the early 1980s. The argument Watanabe makes is specific and technical, but its conclusion is simple. Zenith televisions from the integrated chassis era are, by measurable standards, the most durable consumer electronics ever mass-produced in the United States, possibly anywhere. Now remember that detail from Chapter 3, the one that seemed minor. The one about Zenith refusing to adopt modular chassis design when the rest of the industry moved on. The stubbornness, the premium market inflexibility, the trade publications dismissed in 1966. That is the accidental monument. Not a strategy, not a calculated premium positioning play. An accident of engineering culture. The insistence of men like the Zenith floor technicians who would not compromise their production standards, even when the market gave them every financial incentive to do so. Those men preserved something without knowing they were preserving it. And now, 15 years after the industry moved past them, the world is circling back. A small but serious collector market emerges through the 1980s, specifically around American-made Zenith sets from the 1955 to 1975 window. Prices at estate sales and antique electronics auctions begin climbing. Repair technicians who specialize in vintage Zenith equipment develop waiting lists. The sets are sought not despite their age, but because of what their age proves: that the construction quality was real, was documented, and was irreplaceable. Here is where the irony sharpens into something almost painful. By the time this collector market reaches critical mass in the mid-1980s, Zenith Electronics is already financially strained. The company is fighting on price with manufacturers who have 10 times its production scale. Its domestic market share has been bleeding for a decade. The engineering culture that accidentally created these durable, now sought-after televisions is intact. The people are still on the floor, the standards are still being upheld. But the financial runway to turn that culture into a premium brand story is shrinking every quarter. A different company, one with patient capital, one with ownership willing to wait 5 years for a repositioning strategy to pay off, might have seen this collector market as a signal, might have leaned into the durability story, might have built a campaign around the fact that Zenith sets from 1965 are still running in 1985, while competitor sets from 1975 are already in landfills. Zenith's ownership structure does not allow for 5-year patience. It barely allows for 5 quarters. And so the thing that could have saved the company, the accidental proof that everything Zenith ever claimed about its own quality was true, arrives at exactly the moment when the company no longer has the financial capacity to use it. The value is always there. The world just found it too late. Or rather, and this is the part that should make every viewer sit up straight, the financial system surrounding Zenith found a way to make sure there was no time left to use it. How exactly does that happen? Who makes that call? And what does a room full of men in suits actually look like when they are deciding to end something that took 80 years to build? Chapter 7. Financial Collapse Forces Sale to LG Ending Manufacturing. In 1995, Zenith Electronics reports a net loss of $179 million. Not a bad quarter, not a temporary setback. $179 million in a single fiscal year, in a company that once generated enough cash to build Chicago neighborhoods from the ground up. The number lands on the executive team's table like a stone through glass, clear, irreversible, final in a way that all the previous years of managed decline had not quite been. The men in that room, CEO Albin Moschner leading the discussion, board members and financial advisors arranged around him, are not indifferent. They are not calculating predators engineering a demolition. They are people who have watched every lever they could reach fail to stop a bleed that started before some of them arrived at the company. Every restructuring attempt, every joint venture, every supply chain adjustment, every product line refinement. The bleed continued through all of it. The mathematics of the situation are unambiguous by 1995. Zenith cannot sustain full American manufacturing. The cost per unit, built in Chicago with American labor and American components, and the full Zenith testing protocol, is no longer reconcilable with any price point the mass market will pay. The premium segment that Zenith hoped would carry it is real but not large enough. Not nearly large enough. What follows is a sequence, step by step, Decision by consequence. Manufacturing partnerships are formalized with Korean and Mexican facilities. Assembly lines in Chicago are consolidated. The workforce on Dickens Avenue, which has already been declining through the late 1980s and early 1990s, drops further. Not in one announcement. In a series of smaller announcements that, taken individually, each sound like a strategic repositioning. Taken together, they were a withdrawal. Then comes the moment that determines everything. In 1995, LG Electronics of South Korea, then still operating partly under the name Lucky Gold Star, acquires a controlling interest in Zenith. The deal is presented publicly as a partnership, a strategic alliance. An opportunity for Zenith to leverage Korean manufacturing efficiency while maintaining its American brand identity and engineering heritage. Inside the factory on Dickens Avenue, Arden Calloway hears about it on the radio driving into work. He sits in the parking lot for 4 minutes before going inside. He does not tell anyone what he is thinking. He punches in. He goes to his station. His hands do what they have always done, precise, practiced, without hesitation, but something has shifted in the air of the building that morning, and everyone on the floor feels it without being able to name it exactly. The kind of shift you feel in a room when a conversation has happened that you were not part of, and the people who were part of it are not saying what was decided. What was decided, though it will take 3 more years to fully execute, is this: the Zenith brand will survive. The Zenith factory will not. The distinction matters. It matters enormously. Because what LG is acquiring is not the building on Dickens Avenue. It is not the testing protocols or the integrated chassis engineering culture or the 32 years of accumulated knowledge in Arden Calloway's hands. What LG is acquiring is the name, the logo. The brand equity built over 80 years by men like Eugene McDonald and Carl Hassel, and the 22,000 workers who turned a philosophy into a product that American families trusted in the way they trusted almost nothing else. The name will go on Korean-manufactured televisions. The knowledge will not transfer. It cannot transfer. It lives in people, not documents. It lives in the specific learned instincts of technicians who have spent careers understanding what makes a Zenith, and those technicians are about to be separated from the machines they have spent those careers operating. Corporate language, during this period, describes the transition as a restructuring of operational assets to optimize long-term competitive positioning. The phrase means something very different depending on whether you are reading it in a boardroom or hearing it for the first time in a factory parking lot at 6 in the morning. Moschner and the board are not wrong about the arithmetic. The numbers do not lie, but the numbers also do not see what is about to be permanently destroyed in the process of solving them. They didn't set out to erase something irreplaceable. They set out to survive. But survival decisions made inside a system that only measures short-term financial return have a way of destroying exactly the things that cannot be rebuilt. And the people who built them have no vote in the matter. The decision is made. The announcement is coming. And in the building on Dickens Avenue, the machines are still running, and Arden Calloway is still at his station, and nobody on that floor yet knows that the clock has already stopped. They just cannot hear it yet. Chapter 8. Chicago Factory Shutdown Ends Decades of Skilled Work. On a Tuesday morning in the spring of 1998, a manager named Daryl walks the Zenith factory floor on Dickens Avenue carrying a clipboard he does not look at. He knows what he is going to say. He has rehearsed it. The language has been approved by Human Resources and reviewed by Legal and calibrated to be clear without being confrontational, informative without being emotional. It is the language of corporate transition, a dialect developed specifically to deliver news that is devastating while sounding merely administrative. The workers already know. Not from an announcement, not from a leaked memo. They know the way people who have spent decades reading the specific emotional weather of a workplace know things, through the texture of management behavior over the previous 18 months. The way certain conversations stop when certain people walk by. The way overtime requests have been quietly declined. The way the maintenance crew stopped replacing equipment that broke down and started working around it instead. The floor has been reading these signs the way sailors read the sky, and the sky has been telling the same story for a long time. Daryl delivers the news in sections, by department, by shift. The language is precise and controlled. The Zenith manufacturing operation in Chicago will be consolidated. Production is being moved to facilities better positioned for current market conditions. The company thanks its workforce for their decades of commitment and service. Severance packages will be available. A transition assistance program is being established. The floor does not erupt. There is no scene. That is the thing people who have not witnessed the end of something like this do not understand. They expect drama. They expect anger in the moment, or tears, or confrontation. What actually happens is quieter and, in its own way, much harder to watch. People nod, people look at the floor, people look at the person standing next to them, the person they have stood next to for 15 years, or 20, or in Arden Calloway's case, 32. And exchange a look that does not require words, because the words would not be adequate anyway. The machines do not stop immediately. The Chicago operation winds down over months, not days. Lines are decommissioned in sequence. Workers are let go in waves, each wave smaller than the last, which somehow makes each one harder rather than easier. The building empties the way a conversation empties when the thing that needed to be said has finally been said and there is nothing left to add. Arden Calloway works his last shift on a Friday. He does not make a speech. He is not that kind of man, and this is not that kind of ending. He cleans his station the way he has cleaned it at the end of every shift for 32 years, methodically, completely, leaving it in exactly the condition he would want to find it in if he were coming back tomorrow. He opens his locker. The photograph of his daughters is there. Both of them adults now, one in Indianapolis, one in Atlanta, both with children of their own who have grown up watching televisions that are not Zenith. He takes the photograph down. He takes his tools, the pliers, the precision screwdrivers, the small instruments that have lived in his hands so long they have taken the shape of his grip, and he wraps them in a cloth the way a barber wraps his best scissors. He does not look back when he walks out the door. Not because he is not affected. Because some things are too large to face head-on, and the only way through them is straight ahead. The building stays lit through the rest of that day. The lights on the floor, the long fluorescent tubes that have run 24 hours a day for 40 years, burn through the afternoon and into the evening, and then, at some point in the night, someone switches them off. The silence that follows is not empty. It is full of everything that happened inside those walls and will not happen there again. The factory stopped. But the people walking out of it are about to discover that losing a job and losing a livelihood are not the same thing. And that the distance between those two losses is wider and darker than any quarterly report has ever tried to measure. Chapter 9. Workers face aftermath as skills become obsolete today. 6 months after the Zenith factory closes, a retraining program opens in a community college 16 blocks from Dickens Avenue. The program offers certificates in computer skills, medical billing, and retail management. The classes are held in the evenings, in fluorescent-lit rooms with plastic chairs that are nothing like the factory floor and everything like the opposite of it. The instructors are professional and well-meaning. The curriculum is designed to match skills to the jobs that exist in the Chicago economy of 1999. Arden Calloway attends 2 sessions. He does not go back. Not because he is stubborn. Not because he refuses to adapt. He does not go back because the program is designed to train people for entry-level positions in industries that have no use for what he actually knows. And what he actually knows, 32 years of accumulated, specific, tested knowledge about how to build a precision electronics product to a quality standard that almost no one in the world is still willing to pay for, has no certificate. It has no transferable credential. It exists in his hands and his instincts and the neural pathways carved by 3 decades of repetition. And none of that travels through a 16-week community college program into a new career. This is the loss that does not appear in the official numbers. The official numbers are stark enough. More than 2,000 workers lose their jobs in the final Chicago closure. The unemployment rate in the surrounding zip codes climbs. Household income in the Dickens Avenue corridor drops measurably and does not recover to its 1995 levels for more than a decade. These numbers are real, and they matter. But behind the numbers is something the numbers cannot hold: the end of a knowledge system. Every industry that reaches genuine mastery, whether it is textile manufacturing, steel production, precision electronics assembly, develops a body of knowledge that is not written in any manual. It is passed from experienced workers to new ones through proximity, through demonstration, through the 10,000 small corrections that a senior technician makes in the course of a shift when a junior one makes a decision that is technically within tolerance but not quite right. This knowledge transfer requires time, requires physical co-presence, requires the specific environment of an operating production floor. You cannot recreate it in a classroom. You cannot reconstruct it once the floor is gone. When the Zenith factory closes, that knowledge system ends. The workers who carry it disperse, some to other industries, some to retirement, some to years of unemployment that age them in ways that statistics do not capture. The knowledge does not transfer with them because there is nowhere to transfer it to. The American consumer electronics manufacturing industry, by 1998, has contracted to the point where there are no other floors to bring it to. The LG Corporation, now operating the Zenith brand from South Korea, issues a statement describing its commitment to the Zenith legacy of quality. The statement is sincere in the way that corporate statements can be sincere, reflecting a genuine intention held by people who understand branding to maintain what the name represents. But the name, separated from the factory, is no longer the same thing it was. A Zenith television built in a Korean facility by workers operating under a different production philosophy, with different component sourcing, under different ownership incentives, and different quality protocols, is not the set that Kenji Watanabe found in that Chicago secondhand store in 1982 and took apart in his hotel room. The name is the same. The object is different. And consumers who knew Zenith from their parents' living rooms and their grandparents' living rooms gradually notice the difference, not dramatically, not in a way that makes headlines, but in the slow, quiet way that trust erodes when the thing it was built on is no longer there. Meanwhile, the neighborhood around Dickens Avenue adjusts, the diner closes, the bowling league dissolves. The parish school's enrollment drops by 30% over the following decade and never recovers. The bungalows change hands at lower prices, then lower prices again. It is not devastation, it is deflation. A slow release of pressure, a gradual withdrawal of the economic gravity that held the community in its particular shape. Arden Calloway stays in Chicago. His daughter in Indianapolis asks him to move there, where there is more opportunity, where the housing is cheaper, where she can look after him. He thanks her. He stays. He is 60 years old, and Chicago is the only city he knows, and Dickens Avenue, even emptied, is still the address his life was organized around for the years that mattered most. He finds work eventually. Security guard. A warehouse on the west side that stores industrial equipment. He works nights. The pay is a third of what he made at Zenith. He does not complain about it because complaining has never been part of his character, and because the men he worked with at Zenith did not raise a man who wastes time on what cannot be changed. But here's the question he carries, the one he does not ask out loud because there is no one to ask it to who has the authority to answer it. If Zenith built something that the whole world eventually came looking for, and if the people who built it were still there, still capable, still willing, then what exactly was the decision to close the factory? Was it a mistake? Was it inevitable? Was it a system doing exactly what it was designed to do? The answer to that question is in the building, and the building is still there. Chapter 10. Factory becomes monument to system that replaced it. It is a Tuesday morning in 2024. The brick is the same industrial red it has always been. Dense, Chicago dark, built to outlast the people who made it and the company it housed, and the economy that once ran through it like a current. The large pane windows catch the October light the way they have caught every October's light since 1923. The steel mullions are intact. The structural bones of the building are, by any engineer's assessment, sound. The ghost of the lettering is still visible above the entrance. Zenith. The shape of it pressed into the brick by decades of weathering around letters that were removed when the production stopped and the company's presence ended. The letters themselves are gone. The impression they left is permanent. Inside, it is quiet in the specific way that industrial spaces are quiet when they are no longer industrial. A silence that is not peaceful exactly, because the space was not designed for peace. It was designed for production, for motion, for the hum of 17 assembly lines and the movement of 22,000 people and the specific organized energy of a facility running at full capacity. That energy is what the silence replaces, and in its absence, the size of what was lost becomes architectural. You can measure it in the ceiling height and the square footage and the loading dock capacity and all the physical specifications of a building built to house something much larger than its current emptiness. Near the old loading dock, in a corner where a steel threshold meets the brick floor, a small brass plate is still bolted to the wall. A part number, a shift code, stamped into metal in a year that no longer matters by a hand whose name no record kept. The plate was never meant to be significant. It was functional, the kind of industrial marking that a working factory produces by the thousands, each one meaningful only in context, only while the thing it belonged to was still running. Now it is the last physical record of a production operation that once defined an industry and anchored a city and gave 32 years of purpose to a man named Arden Calloway. It was never intended to be a monument. But that is exactly what it is. And the way it got there, unintentionally, through the simple act of surviving while everything around it was removed, is the same way Zenith's quality survived while the industry moved past it. The same way Zenith's knowledge survived in the hands of workers long after the financial system decided those hands were too expensive to keep. Here is what this building, this Tuesday morning, this brass plate in the corner, is actually saying. What happened to Zenith Electronics was not a story about bad management, though there were management decisions that accelerated the outcome. It was not a story about lazy workers, though that is the story that gets told about American manufacturing in the aggregate, in the speeches and the talking points and the political arguments. The workers in this building were among the most skilled, most dedicated, most productive manufacturing workers in the world, and the record of what they built, the durability studies, the collector premiums, the Kenji Watanabe hotel room discovery, proves it beyond any reasonable argument. What happened here was a system operating as designed. A financial system that measures value in quarterly increments cannot account for knowledge that accumulates over 32 years. It cannot price the community that forms around a stable employer over 4 decades. It cannot quantify what is lost when a generation of skilled workers disperses and the knowledge they carry disperses with them. These things are real. They are economically significant in ways that are measurable over the long term. But the system that made the decisions about Zenith's future was not built to look at the long term. It was built to look at the next quarter, and so it looked at the next quarter. And it made the only decision that the next quarter permitted. And the factory closed, and the knowledge ended, and the neighborhood deflated, and the brass plate in the corner stayed bolted to the wall because no one thought to take it. This is the sentence worth writing down. The one worth carrying out of this building and into the conversation you will have about it later. When a system is designed to reward short-term financial efficiency, anything that requires patience, craftsmanship, and continuity will eventually be removed. Not because it failed, but because it does not fit the system that replaced it. Zenith Electronics did not disappear because it was outcompeted by a better product. It disappeared because it was outpaced by a different logic, a logic that moved faster, a logic that measured different things, a logic that had no category for what Arden Calloway's 32 years were worth, or what the soldering joints in a 1962 Zenith television still holding clean in 1982 actually proved about the people who made them. The factory is still standing. The system that emptied it is still running. And somewhere in Chicago, Arden Calloway is in his 80s. His tools, the ones he wrapped in cloth on his last shift, are in a drawer in his kitchen. He has not used them professionally since 1998. He keeps them anyway, not for sentiment. For the same reason the factory keeps its bones intact after everything inside has been removed. Because some things are built to last longer than the people who decide their value. If this story moved you, if you saw something in Zenith's story that reminded you of a place, a job, a factory, or a community you have watched disappear, drop it in the comments right now. Your story matters. These histories matter. They are not just about television sets or factory floors. They are about what gets built when people are given the time and the stability and the trust to build it, and what gets taken when those conditions are removed. Subscribe to this channel and turn on your notifications so you do not miss what comes next. Every week we bring you the untold stories of the companies, the workers, and the communities that built this country, the ones that thrived, the ones that fell, and the ones that left something behind, worth understanding. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And if you have a story of your own, a place that mattered, a company that is gone, a name above a door that no longer exists, leave it in the comments below. These are the stories that do not make headlines when they end. They deserve to be told anyway.